Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Nadia Jani. Here are the top stories. UN sanctions on Iran after weeks of failed diplomacy. Ukraine suffers from another massive Russian drone attack. And Azerbaijan marks the 5th anniversary since the start of the Second Karabakh War. First, the United Nations reinstalls sanctions on Iran following claims by Britain, France and Germany that Tehran had violated an agreement preventing it from developing nuclear weapons. Attempts to delay the return of all sanctions failed at the annual gathering of world leaders at the UN this week.
United Nations reimposed sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. The decision follows action by the European powers, known as the E3, and consisting of Britain, France and Germany, who triggered a 30-day process accusing Tehran of violating the 2015 deal meant to prevent it from developing a nuclear weapon. Iran strongly denies the allegation and defends its right to pursue a civilian nuclear program. A Russian and Chinese-backed Security Council resolution to delay the sanctions failed, prompting Tehran to warn that the West would be responsible for any consequences.
The E3 and the United States bear full responsibility for the serious consequences of today's decision. By ignoring facts, spreading false claims, misrepresenting Iran's peaceful program, and blocking diplomacy, they have actively and intently paved the way for dangerous escalation.
Diplomats had said the resolution to delay sanctions for 6 months was unlikely to pass, after last-minute talks between Iran and the E3 failed to break the deadlock. 9 countries voted against it, while 2 abstained. The sanctions will restore an arms embargo, a ban on uranium enrichment, a global asset freeze, and travel bans on Iranian individuals and entities. Iran's energy sector is also expected to be affected. UN member states will be required to restrict access to banking and financial services that could support Iran's nuclear or ballistic programs. Anyone violating the sanctions could see their assets frozen worldwide. The snapback process reactivates UN resolutions, but practical enforcement depends on member states updating their national laws. It will fall to the European Union and Britain to pass legislation to implement the sanctions, though neither has provided details on how that will proceed.
Now let's turn to those who will be directly impacted by the sanctions, the citizens in Tehran, many of whom believe the renewed measures will directly affect their daily lives and the already strained economy.
Iranians in Tehran's bazaars weighed the impact of renewed UN sanctions. Residents believe the sanctions will inevitably affect their daily lives.
One way or another will become isolated. Economically, it will definitely have an effect.
Look, there's no time left anymore for reconciliation. It's over. They should have made a move earlier.
I just want to make a living. I don't care about the resolution. I want there to be a process where I can live a decent life for myself, my kids, and others like me. Now, if they want to do something they believe is in the country's best interest, the assumption is that they are acting in the country's best interest. Maybe they're thinking long-term in a way we don't understand, or maybe it's shallow thinking. But for us, it's simple. We just want to make a living.
Under the deal, a snapback mechanism allows sanctions to return if Iran is found non-compliant. Iran denies pursuing nuclear weapons and has warned of a strong response, saying the West will be responsible for any fallout. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said that country is prepared for the UN sanctions. He pointed to regional partnerships and support from allies like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as national unity, as key to managing the pressure.
And managing this pressure is likely to be their top priority. Joining me now to discuss this in more detail is political analyst Anna Evans, joining us from Lisbon. Welcome.
Hello, Nadia.
Hello. My first question is, things have escalated quite quickly. How did Iran arrive at this position?
Well, Nadia, the thing is that Iran, unfortunately, has been subject to massive sanctions for decades. So this is something that started immediately after the Iran-Iraq war. And, you know, from the United States side, it started when there was the hostage crisis, you know, in the very late 70s. And then, you know, the US imposed, you know, drastic sanctions on Iran. And again, when US Marines were targeted in Lebanon, you know, by the predecessor of Hezbollah, and it was a sponsored group from Tehran. And so it's ever since 79, you know, Iran has been subject to all sorts of punishments by the Western side. And so, you know, throughout the decades, both the United States and the European Union have implemented all sorts of economic coercive diplomacy, i.e. sanctions, that, you know, bear on trade, on critical sectors, on oil, on individuals, on companies. And even when there was the signature of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015, during President Obama's tenure, even then, you know, it lasted a very short time, but during that short time, there were many exceptions and derogations to the you know, easiness of sanctions. So in essence, Iran has been sanctioned for all these decades, and it is actually on the top 3 sanctioned countries in the world. And so now the issue was that there was a lot of diplomatic activity in the latest weeks, because as we know, the Israeli and US war on Iran's nuclear sites, changed the politics and the geodynamics of the Middle East. So if one assumes that Iran's nuclear program has been hit, on the one hand, and on the other hand, we know that Syria's regime, the Assad regime, has fallen, and the Assad regime was a critical proxy of Iran, and also Hezbollah in Lebanon has fallen under Israeli strikes. And so all this changed the geopolitics of the Middle East and the pivotal role that Iran it plays in destabilizing the Middle East. So a great part of the sanctions in the past decades had to do with destabilization of the Middle East and human rights violations. But now the geopolitical situation has changed dramatically. However, you know, neither Russia, you know, nor China, which are, you know, the usual allies of Iran, have been able to settle the problem of a continuity or a revamping of the sanctions. And there is also a problem we must take into account. China is heavily dependent on Iran for oil, and China is an avid consumer of oil. And so it is very, very hard for the United States and for Europe to really implement sanctions on oil trade that actually goes directly to China and Asian countries, you know, via mechanisms that turn around the sanctions.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah. That was a very detailed answer. Very briefly, while I still have you, is it possible just to, does it seem fair, this response to, or a tactical one, to strip Iran from having a nuclear program? Can you just say that quite briefly?
Well, you know, I think the decades behind, you know, led us to think that this was an inevitable outcome. So, you know, one wishes that the geopolitics in the Middle East would actually really change for good. But, you know, Iran knows it has the backing of Asian countries and China and Russia. And, you know, and it is not ready, not yet, to dismantle fully its nuclear capacity and the probability that it will at some point have weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons in particular. And so, yes, I think this was an inevitable outcome. After all we've seen over the decades, that I don't see any major change, notwithstanding the latest attacks to the nuclear facilities. Iran is a critical part here. If Iran is not willing to really change its foreign policy, one can't expect that there is going to be a major change in these, aspects, in these sanctions as coercive measures.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your insight and for joining me today. Thank you so much, Anna Evans. Thank you. Now to the war in Gaza, where Palestinians are fleeing Gaza City as Israeli military operations intensify. Many displaced residents have been forced to leave their homes with little time to take any belongings.
Palestinians continue to flee Gaza City amid what they describe as increasingly intense military operations in recent days. The Israeli military has stepped up its campaign to seize Gaza in its efforts to defeat Hamas, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this month warning Gaza City residents to leave. Many are now moving along coastal roads after fleeing their homes without the chance to take any belongings.
I've been walking from the beach camp since yesterday, 6 a.m. I got the artificial leg recently and I can't walk for long. I arrived at 10 p.m. to another place. We slept outside in the desert and it was cold. I was heading to the south. Look at the situation. There were airstrikes from the quadcopter, shellings from tanks, from the ships also, and targeted all the houses. We didn't have other options. We had to leave without clothes. We don't have blanket or clothes or anything.
As Israeli forces push deeper into the heart of Gaza City, the army claims it is taking steps to avoid hitting civilians. Many displaced residents are now living in tents where essentials such as clean water are difficult to access. Long queues form at water distribution points as adults and children wait to quench their thirst. Even as hundreds of thousands have left the city in northern Gaza, many others have hesitated due to security risks and widespread hunger.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has warned that the will for a Palestinian state will remain incomplete unless Israel is stopped. Speaking at the Bosphorus Diplomacy Forum in Istanbul, he criticised global inaction, questioning why Palestinian statehood was not recognised before 65,000 lives were lost. President Erdogan slammed the UN and other international bodies for losing credibility. On the international stage, he addressed calls to ban Israel from the 2026 World Cup, saying Turkey's Football Federation has voiced its stance. Staying with this topic, the Turkish president also called the UN Security Council members' recognition of the Palestinian state a historic step. The Turkish president stated that support for Palestine should be maintained and that Benjamin Netanyahu's government should be stopped with more effective measures than diplomatic pressure. Joining me now to discuss this is former Turkish diplomat Mehmet Okutcu. Hello there, welcome to the programme.
Hello, good evening.
My first question is, how significant was President Erdogan's remark at the UN General Assembly this week?
Well, I think it was one of the major topics, as you know, in the UN General Assembly. And what was critical in many ways was recognition of the state of Palestine by additional countries, including 2 more United Nations Security Council members, United Kingdom and France. So this changed the whole balance, because out of 5 member countries, permanent member countries of the UN Security Council, only 1 is left now, United States, not recognizing the state of Israel. And at some point, I think, because of all the pressure coming from more than 150 member countries and the 4 Security Council members, US will have no option but to recognize Israel. The question is when, because we already lost so much time and so many people on the ground, more than almost 70,000 people killed, women, innocent children, but also hundreds of thousands of people wounded. Gaza almost uprooted altogether, destroyed. And Netanyahu is talking about annexation of West Bank to Israel, which Trump immediately said that he will not allow this to happen, whatever Israel would like to do. So we are expecting some significant developments to come. And Erdogan played a very critical role in this regard because, as you may remember, all the Islamic world leaders met Trump in New York in the margins of the UN General Assembly. And there, I think there was a positive atmosphere in terms of what U.S. can do, because it's the only country that can stop Israel from moving ahead with its atrocities and towards a ceasefire and exchange of hostages, perhaps, mutually on both sides. And then Erdogan continued to follow up this issue in Washington, D.C. during his state visit to the United States. So my expectation is that as a result of all these efforts, something is expected to come in the next few weeks. What could this be? Of course, there are many plans, like 21-point action plan that Trump is introducing to Hamas as well as Israel. And there is also talk of Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, to come and perhaps lead the provisional government in Gaza until all the arrangements could be finished and the region perhaps could be transferred to West Bank, Palestinian Authority. So there are many question marks still, but I'm quite hopeful as a result of the efforts in the UN over the past week, and some progress has been achieved, and Trump seems to be moving ahead despite whatever Netanyahu is doing to kill any prospects for peace in the region. Because also it was quite noteworthy that Netanyahu, when he came to New York, and he was addressing empty chairs in the UN General Assembly because there was a walkout of majority of members in the General Assembly in protest. So Israel is feeling that it's going to be isolated further. And from my Israeli friends, what I hear is intention is to sign this peace agreement, ceasefire, arrange the exchange of prisoners, dead or alive, and then perhaps call for an early election. And because his intention is not to stay with this government, which is a fragile coalition, and he wants to come back as a powerful minister controlling the parliament. And my expectation is that this is not going to happen. Probably he will go after the first election that we are going to see soon. So there will be many developments involving Palestinians, Israel, US action, and Islamic world acting in a uniform way. And this is also somehow speeded up by what happened in Qatar. Israeli F-35s hitting Qatar, and this is a major blow to a very close US ally and also part of the Abraham Accords with Israel. This was, I think, the last drop.
Yes, thank you. Just to ask another question before my time is up with you. President Erdogan met with the US President Donald Trump, as you mentioned, this week, and they strengthened ties between the two countries. Do you think Trump could be persuaded by Erdogan's speech for a Palestinian state? Could there be pressure from the likes of Turkey, Europe, etc., to actually make this a possibility?
Well, I don't think that we should be tempted to jump into easy conclusions, because Trump and his team definitely rely on the Jewish business groups, Jewish lobby, and evangelists in the United States. They are not going to give up Israel. They will support Israel in any way they can. We saw that in the past, how it happened, and they even joined Israeli attacks against Iran. And therefore, I don't expect Trump to change his mind just because Erdogan is pushing it or the other Islamic world leaders are calling for it. But he will realize that U.S. also will be isolated, and the U.S. interest, strategic interests, will be compromised if he continues to support. I'm not talking about Israel. Of course, everybody recognized the right of Israel to exist there and sovereignty. I think we are talking about Netanyahu's irredentist expansionism in the region. Israel has every right to attack against any terrorist attack, as any nation will do. However, here there was a disproportionate use of force. Many civilians, women and children have been killed, and this cannot continue. I think Trump also realized that if he doesn't take some action right now, after so many people died and wounded, I think U.S. will be in a difficult position vis-à-vis its traditional partners, including Turkey, Gulf nations, and other members of the United Nations Security Council. It's isolated. It's going to be alone.
Yes, well, thank you so much for your insights and for joining me, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Turning to Ukraine now, Russia unleashed 115 attack drones across Ukraine overnight. The Ukrainian Air Force says 97 were shot down in the north, south, east and central regions, but 17 targets were struck, including the city of Zaporizhia, where a supermarket and nearby cars were destroyed. Power was cut to nearly 9,000 residents, though no casualties are reported. The drones came from launch sites in Russia and occupied Crimea. Ukrainian officials will soon head to the US to discuss major arms and drone deals. President Volodymyr Zelensky says during his recent US visit, Zelensky met President Donald Trump and shared a vision for responding to Russia's war, including a $90 billion weapons wish list. Ukraine has already deployed one Patriot missile system from Israel, with 2 more coming this autumn.
With your help, first of all.
As for what Ukraine wants from the United States of America, we have passed to the President of the United States of America all of this, in details, and with illustrations of what Ukraine wants. The Israeli Patriot system is already operational in Ukraine. It has been operational for a month. We are also expecting 2 more Patriot systems during the autumn. Putin won't wait until the end of the war in Ukraine. He will open another door. No one knows where that door is. No one knows for sure where that door is. But one thing is certain. He wants to do it. He is testing Europe. He has checked that Europe doesn't have the capacity to protect itself from Russian drones.
Germany is sounding the alarm over drones. Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt says the threat level is high, calling it abstract in general but very real in specific incidents. The warning comes after repeated drone incursions in Denmark shut down air traffic. Dobrindt told journalists that Berlin is preparing new measures, including a revision of aviation security laws that would let the German armed forces shoot down hostile drones if necessary.
I will set up a drone defense center that will ensure that the competences of the federal and state governments, the federal police, the Federal Criminal Police Office and the state police are connected. Financial resources are pooled, technological know-how is brought together, and new research projects are initiated. It's about detecting drones. It's about intercepting drones. It's also about shooting down drones. These are the basics we are talking about when we reposition ourselves for drone defense. It's an urgently needed project that is already underway. We are moving quickly to start discussions with our European neighbours. In a few days, on October 4th, the Munich migration meeting will take place in Munich, and there, in addition to migration issues, we will also discuss drones again.
Now, Moldovans are heading to the polls on Sunday in a pivotal parliamentary election that could shape the country's future in Europe. Here's more.
Moldovans are heading to the polls on Sunday for a high-stakes parliamentary election that could determine the country's path toward European Union membership. The vote for all 101 seats in Parliament comes after multiple crises linked to the war in Ukraine, including energy shortages and economic strain. Moldova, one of Europe's poorest countries, imports much of its energy from Romania, following Russian supply cuts, while inflation remains around 7%. Opinion polls suggest a tight race between President Maia Sandu's pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, and several pro-Russian parties, including the Patriotic Bloc. The nominally pro-European Alternative Alliance is also contesting the vote, appealing to voters frustrated by slow reforms, high prices and scepticism over closer ties with the EU. PAS may struggle to secure a majority and could need to form a coalition, which would affect the pace of Moldova's EU ambitions. Adding to the tension, a major pro-Russian party has been barred from Moldova's parliamentary elections just 2 days before voting. The Central Electoral Commission disqualified the Heart of Moldova party after a court suspended its activities for a year over allegations of voter bribery, illegal financing and money laundering. The party is part of the Russia-friendly Patriotic Electoral Bloc, a key rival to the ruling pro-Western party of Action and Solidarity. Its leader, Irina Vlar, denounced the decision as a political spectacle and was also banned this week from entering 3 EU countries over claims of aiding Moscow's interference. Officials in Chisinau say the ban is essential to protect Moldova's democracy from Kremlin-backed schemes. President Maia Sandu has described Sunday's election as the most consequential in the country's history, warning that Russia has spent millions to influence the vote and recruited operatives to stir unrest. Moscow, however, dismisses these accusations as anti-Russian and unfounded. But the head of the EU election observer mission says there is ample evidence of Russian interference. Authorities have arrested dozens of individuals over alleged Russian-backed activities, with intelligence reports indicating some citizens were trained abroad in protest tactics. The Kremlin's influence efforts are believed to extend beyond politics, reaching into religious networks. Moldova's government accuses Russia of recruiting Orthodox priests to sway voters toward pro-Russian parties. National Security Advisor Stanislav Secrieru says priests were trained in Russia, toured holy sites and then returned to Moldova to create parish social media channels warning against European integration.
The most immoral feature of Russian electoral interference in elections in Moldova is the use of the most trusted institution, the church. Russia recruits and trains the priests during so-called all-inclusive pilgrimages in order to turn religion into a weapon. After the training, priests come to Moldova and use their influence in order to sow the mistrust, erode the confidence of society, and to generate and fuel mistrust in our society.
A review of these channels found almost 90 new Telegram accounts disseminating posts echoing pro-Russian narratives, claiming Moldova's traditional values are under threat from the EU. While Kremlin-linked operatives like Artyom Starostin have been connected to the programme, the Moldovan Orthodox Church denies any political campaign and describes the trips as religious pilgrimages. Moldova's diaspora, who usually support pro-European parties, will also influence the results. Brussels has backed Moldova's EU ambitions, and leaders from France, Germany and Poland visited Chisinau in August to reaffirm support. Voters express a wide range of opinions. Some support the ruling pro-European party, seeing it as offering better conditions for Moldova and a path toward EU membership. Others remain uncertain, questioning whether closer ties with Europe will truly benefit the country.
Which would be better for us, the European Union or friendship with Russia? We already know how it was with friendship with Russia. But what will happen in the EU?
With economic pressures, political divisions and concerns over foreign interference, the outcome of Sunday's election is expected to have lasting effects on Moldova's European integration and internal stability.
Turning to the region now, and today marks Remembrance Day in Azerbaijan, honouring the thousands who lost their lives in the Second Karabakh War of 2020. The war became an important point in Azerbaijan's struggle to restore territorial integrity after decades of prolonged conflict. Now we reflect on the path from heavy battles and sacrifice to today's efforts toward peace and rebuilding.
Bugün səhər Ermənistan silahlı qüvvələri
This morning, the Armenian armed forces opened fire on our residential settlements and military positions from several directions, using various types of weaponry, including heavy artillery.
Ermənistan silahlı qüvvələrinin döyüş aktivliyinin qarşısını almaq,
in order to suppress the combat activity of the Armenian armed forces and ensure the safety of the civilian population, the command of the Azerbaijani army has decided to launch a counter-offensive operation along the entire front line.
The 27th of September 2020 began with large-scale shelling along the line of contact. Baku launched counter-operations, saying the goal was to protect civilians and restore territorial integrity. Azerbaijan reported successive gains: Sukhavushan, Jabrail, Hadrut, Fuzuli, Zangilan, Gubadli, culminating in Shusha on 8 November 2020. A trilateral statement on 10 November ended hostilities and provided for Russian peacekeepers and the return of Agdam, Kalbajar and Lachin without fighting. By the war's end, 2,908 Azerbaijani servicemen were confirmed killed, 6 listed missing, 93 civilians died, and 454 were injured in missile and artillery strikes that hit multiple cities. Independent Rights Monitor later documented unlawful rocket and missile strikes on Azerbaijani towns. Rights groups examined sites in Ganja and Barda, concluding no evident military targets in some hit areas and confirming use of cluster munitions in Barda. According to its investigative committee, Armenia's casualty figures from the 44-day war include nearly 3,937 servicemen and 44 civilians killed, while around 191 people remain missing. Officials say approximately 11,000 were wounded. In April 2023, Azerbaijan established a checkpoint at the Lachin Bridge, formally asserting control over the route. Baku later conducted what it called a one-day anti-terror operation in September 2023, taking full control of Karabakh. Azerbaijani authorities point to large-scale rebuilding of roads, airports, villages, alongside phased return of displaced families. In 2024, Baku also announced plans to begin resettlement in Kankendi. A practical breakthrough came in April-May 2024, when Armenia agreed and then implemented the handover of 4 uninhabited border villages to Azerbaijan under delimitation talks. Azerbaijani border guards took control on 24 May 2024. In August 2025, Azerbaijan and Armenia, with US mediation, initialed a peace agreement in Washington. The document commits both sides to recognize each other's sovereignty, renounce territorial claims, and reopen transport links, including a corridor to Nakhchivan.
The country of Armenia and Azerbaijan are committing to stop all fighting forever, open up commerce, travel, and diplomatic relations, and respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Declaration establishes what they are calling a great honor for me. I didn't ask for this. The Trump route for international peace and prosperity, which is a special transit area that will allow Azerbaijan to get full access to its territory of Nakhchivan, while fully respecting Armenia's sovereignty. So they're going to be able to really live and work together, and it's amazing.
The Washington talks produced not just a draft peace agreement, but also a broader framework. US mediation brought the leaders together to pledge the end of hostilities and the reopening of long-blocked routes. Armenia and Azerbaijan both described the deal as a foundation for lasting peace.
President of the United States.
This is a great deal we've achieved today. This is a success for our countries and for our region. and a success for the world, because a more peaceful region means a safer world.
At the White House meeting, President Aliyev, Prime Minister Pashinyan, and US President Trump issued a joint declaration calling even for the closure of the OSCE Minsk process and saying a new framework should guide the region. For Azerbaijan, the Washington process was not only about peace with its neighbor, but also about redefining relations with the United States. Baku presents the declaration as the start of a broader strategic partnership.
Actually, we are writing a new history in a bilateral interstate relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan. We are starting the path towards a strategic partnership. The Charter on Strategic Partnership will be elaborated within several months, and that is a historic achievement for Azerbaijan, because to be in the format of strategic partnership with the greatest country of the world is a great opportunity and also a very big responsibility. And this strategic partnership format embraces so many important areas.
The Washington Declaration signals a real turning point for the South Caucasus. Through this agreement, Baku and Yerevan commit to sovereignty, connectivity, and a new security architecture. The dismantling of the OSCE Minsk process and the trip corridor linking Nakhchivan reflect bold changes in regional geography. For Armenia, reintegration into trade networks. For Azerbaijan, strategic depth with partners beyond its borders.
Staying on the anniversary, the battle for one city dramatically changed the course of the conflict. The fight for the mountainous Shusha remains the subject of numerous modern warfare case studies. Let's break down this pivotal clash where climbing hands played a greater role than drones or artillery.
In the final stages of the Second Karabakh War, a small mountaintop city became the focal point of one of the most pivotal battles in the conflict. Shusha, with a population barely over 4,000, might seem an unlikely place to shape the outcome of a regional war. But as Azerbaijani forces stormed its sheer cliffs and narrow streets in early November 2020, it quickly became clear. This was no ordinary city, and this would be no ordinary battle. Modern War Institute published a case study of Shusha battle in their Urban Warfare Project special series. Based on their research, we're examining the combat through the lens of its challenging terrain. Situated on a strategic plateau, Shusha's value was both geographic and symbolic. To Azerbaijan, it was a city of deep cultural and historical importance. The Azerbaijani operation to take Shusha began not with tanks or airstrikes, but with silent, strenuous climbs through mountain fog. Heavy fog grounded much of Azerbaijan's drone fleet, which had played a defining role earlier in the war. But it also concealed Azerbaijani movements, allowing Special Operations Forces teams to move through terrain thought impassable. Armed with only what they could carry, some 90 pounds of gear, these soldiers climbed over 400 meters of near-vertical terrain to reach the city's outskirts. Divided into 4 companies attacking from different directions, Azerbaijani forces pushed into Shusha street by street, fighting intense, close-quarters battles. The fog that had concealed their approach also complicated their assault, limiting visibility and disorienting both sides. Despite these challenges, Azerbaijani units advanced. A northern company seized the city's iconic fortress, while others cleared neighborhoods one by one. By November 8th, Azerbaijani forces had raised their flag over Shusha. Once they seized control of the city, it was clear the war was over. Within 24 hours of losing Shusha, Armenia agreed to end the conflict on terms favorable to Azerbaijan. On November 10th, Russia brokered a ceasefire that brought the war to an end. Ultimately, the Battle of Shusha was about more than military tactics. It was a reflection of how modern wars are shaped by leadership, training, adaptability, and the meaning we attach to places. The battle demonstrated that with the right preparation, even the most difficult terrain can be overcome, and that even the smallest cities can carry the heaviest weight in determining the course of history.
On Saturday, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan addressed the United Nations General Assembly. He highlighted the March peace draft and the 8th of August Washington Declaration, signed in the presence of US President Donald Trump, which affirmed mutual recognition of borders based on the 1991 Almaty Declaration. Pashinyan credited Trump's role and said both leaders agreed to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. He also highlighted the unprecedented positive dialogue with Turkey, noting regular meetings with President Erdogan, and expressed confidence that this will lead to diplomatic relations and the full opening of the border. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze has pledged new reforms to boost investor confidence and raise project standards in energy and infrastructure. Speaking at the Georgian Business Association conference, he vowed to end permit resale practices that have slowed the energy sector. He highlighted a recent $6.6 billion investment deal with the UAE firms as proof of Georgia's growing appeal to foreign investors. Kobakidze also stressed the need for efficiency and fair competition in construction, aiming to build on the country's strong economic growth. Oil from Iraq's Kurdistan region has begun flowing to Turkey for the first time in 2 years, and 2.5 years following a landmark agreement between Baghdad, the KRG, and foreign oil companies. The deal, announced earlier by Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, was hailed as an achievement 18 years in the making. The crude flow resumed at 6 a.m. on Saturday, with up to 990,000 barrels per day now headed to the port of Ceyhan. The agreement aims to ensure fair wealth distribution, attract investment, and strengthen Iraq's energy ties. In western Kazakhstan, a major gas project is now underway, supporting the country's goal to strengthen its gas production and energy security. This move comes in the middle of wider reforms aimed at attracting investment and increasing efficiency. For more, we go to our correspondent Fariza Kalimarzina on that story.
A major gas project has been launched in western Kazakhstan. The first stage of production has begun at the Tasplat field in the Mangistau region. The project is being carried out by Tasplat Oil Corporation under the coordination of the Minister of Energy. At the initial stage, production is expected to reach about 50 million cubic meters of gas per year, with potential growth up to 150 million. The Tasplat gas project ranks as a mid-scale development in Kazakhstan's gas sector, with production volumes significantly smaller than the country's largest fields like Karachaganak. Yet it plays an important role in regional growth and diversification. The Minister of Energy of Kazakhstan has also announced the launch of similar projects in the Kızılorda and Atrau regions as part of a broader strategy to increase gas production and deepen processing within the country. And according to the ministry, Kazakhstan produced 17.3 billion cubic meters of gas in the first 7 months of this year. However, despite the reserves and export potential, the country faces a shortage due to low domestic tariffs and aging infrastructure. To address this, Kazakhstan has begun reforming its gas sector to build a more sustainable and investment-attractive model. Key elements of the new gas policy include developing the West Prov and Central Urichtau fields, as well as building modern processing plants in the Atrau region using Kashagan feedstock and in Janauzen. A project at the Karachaganak field with a capacity of up to 4 billion cubic meters per year is also under consideration. International investors, including the Qatari company UCC Holding, are involved in these developments. At the same time, Kazakhstan is strengthening its role as a transit hub in Central Asia. Last year, the volume of transit gas increased by almost 10%, reaching 69.6 billion cubic meters. Kazakhstan serves as a transit route for Russian gas to Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, as well as Turkmen and Uzbek gas to China. Additionally, the country has an agreement to export its own gas to China until 2026, which is an important factor for its position in the regional market. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
Thank you for joining me. That's your news update for now. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for more further updates.